Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And this episode of the Intentional Encourager podcast is going to be freaking brilliant. And that's because I have Bob Sager. Bob is the president and CEO of SpearPoint Solutions. And you can find Bob on LinkedIn. You can find Bob on a lot of other platforms that he'll get into in just a minute. But it is my pleasure to welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, Bobcast. I said that, you have a flub up. I don't edit these things out because here's the thing, man. It is what it is. When you're working with limited talent, it is what it is. Bob Sager joins me on the Intentional Encourager podcast, not Bobcast. Bob, how you doing today?
I'm great, and I have to tell you, I kind of like Bobcast.
You ought to run with that, man. You really, if you do your own podcast, just call it a Bobcast.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Brian. I'm going to have to permanently borrow that from you.
It's yours, my friend. I freely have as you freely give to others, my friend, it's freely given to you in return. So, man, I can't thank you enough for joining me this morning. Bob, you have taken a really different approach during the pandemic and before the pandemic in involving other people in what you're doing. And I want to start there because I think it's just, it's, and you and I have known each other a little bit, so it's not surprising to me, but you have taken it to an intentional level during this pandemic. What prompted you to do what you're doing with your offerings and just say, here you go, I'm going to take these to another level and try to help more and more people through this pandemic?
Well, look, I think people learn, at least if they're paying attention, they learn over time that whatever you put out is going to come back to you, and it's going to be amplified a little bit when it comes back. Now, and I think you have to do that, though, in the right spirit. And what I mean by that is you've got to give to others, not with the expectation of return, not with sort of a quid pro quo mindset, but you've got to give to others because you want to, because that's how you live your life, and because that's how the world is made better. Now, and let me just, for your entrepreneurial listeners, let me clarify that. I think you give in everything. And I think you give in every business transaction. So how can you do that? People say, well, how do you give in business transactions? Well, what you do is you make sure, and all exceptional companies do this, you make sure that your customers get so dramatically more in value than what they're paying you that it's a total no-brainer to continue to be a customer. It's a total no-brainer to tell others. It's such a good way to attract the right people. And when you're doing that, when you're giving with every transaction, you feel so good about what you're doing. So, I think it's, and look, it took me a long time to learn that lesson, Brian. But it's a lesson worth learning because it just pays such dividends, not just economically, but in the fulfillment that you have in your life.
And Bob, here's the thing with I love what you said there, and I'm going to park on that for just a minute, because a lot of times in a selling transaction, years ago when I got into sales, you were the product expert. Everything about your product or service, you were the expert as a salesperson. It was your job to do all the education and get your customer as educated as they could be to make the right buying decision. Well, now customers are educated right here before you ever touch them. They probably know more about your company and your product or service than you do at times. And they read reviews and they do other things like that. And I love what you said there about value. In your opinion, how is value best transferred in the mind of a customer when they don't know the value of what you're bringing in the first place? So how do you over deliver that experience of value?
Well, I think you have to do things that are unexpected. You know, we were having a pretty good conversation on LinkedIn in the comments on a post on LinkedIn about there was a company that that's a service provider of mine that reached out, just sort of a customer feedback survey, and something that they said, the language that they used in there was astounding to me, because what they said was, it's important to us. Well, who cares, right? I mean, who cares what's important to you? Customers do not care about you until it's important enough to them to care about you, right?
Hey,
And
another
so,
freaking brilliant point, my man.
well, it's so true, and far too many companies and salespeople are too focused on themselves. And so, I heard a story early in my career, and it took me a while to really, really, truly grasp the meaning of this. And was talking about there were two people on opposite sides of a curved wall. And the person on one side of the wall looks at the wall and says, that's a concave wall. The person on the other side of the wall says, no, it's not. It's a convex wall. Now, who's right? From their perspective, they're both right. So I think the smart salespeople, the smart entrepreneurs, the smart companies are the ones that can go around the other side of the wall and take a look from their customer's point of view and get out of their own head. So many people talk about we're so great, we're so great, we're so great. Well, so what? Of course you're going to say that, but all customers listen to the same radio station. It's WIIFM. You know what
What's
that
in it
is,
for
right?
me? Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
So if you do not do a good job of empathizing with your customers, getting on the other side of that wall and seeing things from their point of view, and figuring out what is in it for them, right? And talk about those things. That same customer survey that I just alluded to could have been much more effective in their response rate to it, could have been so much better if they would have said, your answers are extremely valuable because they're going to help us serve you better, right? And we talked about unexpected things. And I know a guest on one of your previous episodes, or maybe a couple of previous episodes, Kristen Sherry, we were talking about how, why not, when somebody responds to that customer survey, give them an unexpected 10% off coupon on the next purchase.
That's going to get me motivated to do that survey.
Well, I don't even think you ought to say that in the beginning. I don't think that you should bribe them to do a survey, other than this is going to help us serve you better. This is some benefit for them should be laid out to inspire them to respond. But then after they respond, then that's when you have the opportunity to deliver something unexpected. And when you deliver unexpected value like that, you surprise and delight them, and that in a sea of noise, that's the kind of thing that floats on top.
Well, Bobby, in that statement translates to anything that you do, because people will say, well, I'm not a salesperson, I don't sell anything. If you deliver unexpected value to other people, you're going to develop a reputation pretty quickly of being a person other people want to be around, because they get something from you that they don't normally expect. And then for the salespeople, here's a thought. I love what you said there. The thought I had around that is the most sensitive mechanism in business is a customer.
they're sort of the purpose of being in business.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we don't exist without customers. And Bob, I have a hard time understanding. And again, the gray in my beard will give an indicator of the years that I've been around in doing this, is that I don't understand how companies look at themselves and say, well, what can we do better, instead of saying, what do customers want from us that we're not giving them right now, or we haven't thought about giving them? What does the customer want? Because if everybody goes out and says, we've got the lowest price and their service is terrible, and Bob, I've used this analogy. I don't mean to hijack the conversation, but I've used this analogy is that, if McDonald's called me and said, Brian, guess what? We had a contest and you put your name in the hat and you won free Big Macs for a year. I like other things at McDonald's. I don't like Big Macs. So that is of no value to me. So
Right.
they may think, oh my gosh, Brian, man, free Big Macs for a year. How do you feel? Cheated. I'd rather have filet of fish or a quarter pounder.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't consider, a lot of times salespeople and businesses don't consider what's really valuable to their customers. I want to hand that ball back to you now and talk about the real value to customers.
Well, yeah. And how do you know what they want if you're not asking? Getting back to that same analogy that we were just talking about on the customer feedback survey, a couple of people asked me, well, how should we do this? And I said, first, you got to respect people's time, because as I like to say, there are 5 forms of wealth, and money is only part of it, right? It's money, time, satisfaction, relationships, and health. And so you've got to, even though you're maybe not asking for them to send you a check, you're asking for a non-renewable asset. You're asking for a portion of their time. And so you got to be respectful of that. So the survey that I came up with is a simple 3-question survey. And I shared this with a couple of different people, that had commented on that post that asked. And I said, the first question of your survey is, what is the thing that you liked most about, and fill in the blank, your most recent transaction, what we're doing, etc. The second question is, what is an area for improvement? Where are we not quite meeting your expectation? Something along those lines. And then the third question is, how can we deliver something better for you? What are we not doing that you'd like us to do? That kind of a question. Those are conversation opening questions. And when you can have a dialogue with your customers, and the technology that exists today makes it so easy, so much easier to do than it used to be. When you can do that, people like to do business with people and companies that they perceive care about them. And so when you legitimately care, you want to ask those questions, and you're not afraid to hear the answers, because you sincerely want to improve what you're delivering to the customer. Does that make sense, Brian?
It makes perfect sense. And I'm reminded of a quote by the great Zig Ziglar. And Zig is probably next to my late dad, Zig is my sales hero. And I've gotten to have several conversations with his son, Tom. And I told Tom, I said, one of my favorite quotes that really resonate with me that your dad said, he said, people love to buy, they hate to be sold. And it's just as true now as when Zig came up with it 35 years ago or 40 years ago. It's still true. And Bob, what troubles me, I guess, is in this new world that we have, where people get on their cell phones or get on a laptop or an iPad and they buy things. There's none of that transference of feelings. They're hopping online to buy something that they see, or they got a coupon to buy it, and there's no value being transferred other than the fact of I can sit in my pajamas and order a shirt from Kohl's or Amazon or something like that. There's no customer relationship there. It's all transactional. How do you coach companies to get away from transactional relationships with their customers?
Well, I like that question. And it's the question to ask is, and by the way, let me back up just one
Would
step.
you consider it freaking brilliant? Because again, that's your thing. And I want to see if how many times I can get you to say, man, that's a freaking brilliant question. That was a goal of mine, my friend.
Hey, can I let you in on a secret?
I'd love to hear. We're all about secrets here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
All right. Here's a secret. That the title of my book, 101 Freaking Brilliant Business Ideas, is not mine. I say it's not mine. It was given to me by my wife because, you know, I do a lot of work with companies coming up with ideas and strategies to help them improve their top line and bottom line, improve their employee engagement, those kinds of things. And I just, maybe I'm a little weird, Brian, but I have fun just coming up with these concepts. And so
yeah, don't feel bad. I'm the same way, Bob. My wife has told me for 24 years, you're the weirdest dude I know. Okay. All right.
I had a whole bank of these, and I'm like, you know, these are just sitting in a file.
Yep.
And they're not doing anybody any good sitting in a file. And I said, I think I'm going to compile these things in a book. And so I was just sort of struggling coming up with a memorable title. And my wife and I were just driving along in the car one day, and we were having a conversation about that. And I said, yeah, I'm having a tough time coming up with a title for this book. And she said, why don't you just call it something like 101 Freaking Brilliant Business Ideas? And I almost wrecked the car. I mean, it was so brilliant. It was freaking brilliant.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it was just so good. And she's a pretty creative person too. And she just came off, just right off the top of her head, just came up with that. And it's, I mean, it is so, I've had more people tell me, how brilliant that is than anything else. And I always, give credit where credit's due to my wife for that title, because that's where it came from.
Hey,
so,
the most brilliant thing you did was asking her to marry you. That's where it is for guys like us is that's the smartest thing we ever did was asking our wives to marry us. That's because there's not much for me. There's not much going on up here. So there's got to be something else,
Well, listen, Brian, I did what all men should aspire to, and that's I'm married up.
Amen, brother. Amen
So
to that.
I hope every now and then she has that thought too, but I think it all the time. I'm fortunate. It'll be 25 years next month.
Yeah, we've got my wife and I've got 24 coming up in October. So I understand. Two old married guys just sitting here talking about life and business on the Intentional Encourager podcast. But
right.
I got to ask you
I apologize. I got way late. You asked me a question, and
you know what? That's perfectly fine, because again, this is why I have this format the way that I have it, is because I want everybody to be a part of a conversation that you and I are having, and conversations have layers to them, and it's okay. I mean, sure. It's a conversation that we can have. We find, we were talking about value a minute ago. I value my wife more and more the older I get, because I realize that, hey, dummy, you might want to listen to some things she has to say. She might have something of real value to add that I need to listen to. And so, this is why these conversations exist. I got to ask you about conversations that you're leading with other people, and that's the Meaningful Conversations platform that you have developed. You had it before the pandemic, but you've really developed it a little bit differently since the pandemic. Talk about the Meaningful Conversations platform and how what that's done for you, not only for others, but what it's done for you.
Right. Well, it just one slight correction. We call it meaningful connections.
You know what? Again, it's it's my limited mind capacity. Hey, Bob, that reminds me. I had a podcast guest earlier in the episodes, Kim Thompson Pender, and I butchered her company like 3 times during the podcast, and she had to correct me, and I'm like, Kim, you're working with limited resources here, but it's meaningful connections. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate the correction.
And actually, it's that title is even more applicable now, because what we're doing with that is, it's just it's a group of people. I call it sort of volume business networking. So it's business networking, but it's coupled with, we have a segment that we do on the new version of it where we're utilizing a simple creative thinking method that I invented called Anchor Term, that I use in our creative thinking training fun shops, that I use in a lot of cases in developing strategies for companies. And we do a little mini version of that where we'll pick a beneficiary of that particular conference, and each person that is participating, they take a few minutes and develop some ideas and strategies on how that person can improve their business. And I'll give you an example of that, if you don't mind me sharing.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we had a podcaster that participated in a few conferences back. His name is Ido Singer, and his podcast. Can I say the name of his podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's called One Last Thought. And
because you might give me a future guest idea there. So yeah, go ahead. Fire away, man.
Right. So the goal was to come up with ideas for additional ways that Ido could monetize his podcast. And so he was just blown away. Now, let me tell you what the benefit to that segment is. The people that are participating in that, they get to learn a little something about utilizing creative thinking methods to get off of that circular train of thought. Mm-hmm. And anybody that's the beneficiary, they're going to get some ideas. They're sort of crowdsourcing ideas, for lack of a better term, mm-hmm. And getting something really cool out of that, and maybe something that they can actually run with and develop. They're sort of, if anybody that's listening to this show that's participated, they know they're sort of idea seeds. They need developed a little bit more, but everything starts with an idea, right?
Well, and Bob, here's the thing too. I mean to jump in there, but what you do with those type of conversations is not only do you pick up ideas, but it taps into your own brain to make you more creative. One, you become more creative, and I think that's where you were going with it, to tap into their creative thought processes. But the second thing is you learn how to tap into your giving processes, because a lot of times we take ideas and we say, well, man, I got to guard it like it's the last $100 that I've got. And a great part of life and humanity is that we learn to give more than we receive, and we give freely. And so I would think that an unintended benefit, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that people understand the power of giving a little bit more in helping someone else get to that next level or next plateau in their business or their life.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, that's not necessarily an unintended benefit.
It might be for them. I think you're very intentional about that. But
yeah, and the other thing that I have found, this almost never fails, and I let people know this, that in the process of working on coming up with ideas for somebody else with that in mind, mm-hmm. you almost always end up coming up with some ideas that are going to benefit you. Have nothing to do. It's just because you elevated that your creativity, and you focused on that, you were intentional about it. It happens. And when you get, I have to tell you, when you get that creativity activated in a way, it can take you to some pretty amazing places.
I got to ask you one other question around this, and then I want to get into your story and talk about your life and your story. But have you had, in the meaningful connections, have you had one of those V8, I call them V8 moments? You've had a light bulb, an aha moment where you go, I didn't expect this from this conversation, or I didn't expect this from this conference. Have you had those moments, and what was it like for you as the moderator to have those moments where it just came back to you and just kind of hit you in the face like, I totally didn't expect that?
Oh, well, first of all, I have to say that every time that I'm doing a training, we call them fun shops because they're not work. I'm doing a fun shop, and that's sort of a mini fun shop. And, in that, I've done that with thousands of people probably, over the last dozen years or so. And I'm amazed. I'm constantly amazed that like somebody has come up with an idea that my chin hits the floor. It's like, whoa, holy smokes, that is such a good idea. So the creativity of people, it just never ceases to amaze me. And I have to tell you, frankly, for a lot of them, it amazes them.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell you some stories on that, if we have time, or if we get into our next segment, we talk about some of that training work that we do. It's astounding. It's so fun. And when we get into that, I'll tell you how I feel every time we're doing it.
I was a part of one of the meaningful connections, and I'll never forget this. One of the questions you asked of us in the conference was, what's your favorite breakfast cereal? Okay. Now, when I was a kid, I was a little heavy. When I was a kid, I was heavy till I was about 36, 37 years old. And you said, what's your favorite breakfast cereal? And I thought, you don't have all day. I could run the aisle. I could run the breakfast cereal aisle of stuff that I ate when I was a kid that I liked. And it was like, this guy, I liked everything. I wasn't Mikey. I liked everything, Frosted Flakes and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I just thought that was really neat because I'd never had anybody ask me in something like that what was my favorite breakfast cereal. So now I'm trying to go through my head going, man, what did I eat? And most of the time for us, we ate what was on sale because my parents
Right.
didn't have a lot of money, and so we just ate what was on sale. And now we had good stuff, but we ate what was on sale. Then when I got to be an adult and I had to spend my own money, I was like, yeah, Malto meal tastes kind of like Raisin Bran. I'll just grab this at Walmart, and because I was spending my own money. I just thought that was so neat that you asked that kind of question because I probably hadn't thought about that in 25 years or better. And I love that. I had to mention that because I still remember. I'm like, how am I going to sit here and think for an hour about the kind of breakfast? Then I got hungry. I was like, well, what kind of cereal do we have in the house? So, hey, Bob, I want to take you, and I want to go back and take me as far back as you want to take me from point A to point B, because I like to ask folks how they got from point A to where they are today. And so take me back as far as you want to go in your life journey and your story to where you got to today.
Well, I'll see if I can give you the short version because I don't want to bore your listeners.
Hey, we got all kinds of time, man. It's, these listeners are locked in for a good bit, man. So you take your time. Go ahead.
Well, okay, that's fine. As I'll tell you about a turning point in my life, and that's after I graduated from college. I worked a full-time job and went to school full-time. So anybody that tells you that can't be done is not, they're lying.
So where'd you go to school, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I went to Miami University for a while. And
that's
then,
no bueno, because I went to Marshall, and Marshall for years with Miami. Hey, I got to throw this in here. And I remember and this has been almost 20 years ago. Marshall and Miami played in the same football conference. They played in the Mid-American Conference, and then Marshall went to Conference USA. And for 2 or 3 years, if you are a football fan, every year the game on the calendar was Miami and Marshall, because Marshall had Byron Leftwich playing quarterback for them, and Miami had now future NFL Hall of Famer Ben Roethlisberger playing quarterback for them. Bob, do you remember, and this has been, this has been almost 15, 16 years ago, Miami came to Huntington and played a game, and one of their assistant coaches punched a fan.
I do remember that.
That was in Huntington. Yeah, that was in Huntington.
Infamous incident.
Yeah, but I'll say this. Those schools have since played. We've played Miami, and they have been fantastic games. That's one game that as a Marshall grad and as a fan, there's respect there, because you always know that Miami is going to be a quality opponent. Miami of Ohio is going to be a quality opponent. And I always enjoyed the battles that the Red Hawks and the Thundering Herd had over the years.
So listen, by the way, you said Miami of Ohio. Miami is in Ohio.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I was just using the media's term. Those guys at ESPN, they're Miami of Ohio. Like right. You're not calling it Miami of Florida,
Right. And by the way, Marshall has what an incredible story that they actually made a movie from.
Yep.
A rebirth out of tragedy. It's amazing. Anyway, after graduating from college, I go to work for a little family-run company, and I knew fairly quickly that was probably a mistake. It was just if your last name was not a certain one, you probably weren't going very far, and it just it was a job. It was definitely not going to be a career.
You've worked for those people too. I've worked for those companies.
Yeah. So I began hating every day. I had what Kristen refers to as Sunday dread. About 4:00 Sunday afternoon, I started thinking, I've got to go in that place again tomorrow. And seriously, I would get knots in my stomach. It was that bad. I disliked it and dreaded going there so much. And so one day, I think I had quit without leaving about 3 times. And one day I just had such an awful morning, and I was much less of an even keel guy back in those days. And I went to lunch. There was a park across the street from our building, and the more I sat there, I was just I stewed on it. And the more I thought about it, the more angry I got. I hadn't learned to let things go at that point. And I just said, I'm not going back. They had a guy who was a son-in-law of the founder, who was supposed to be the general manager, but he was also a salesperson for the company. So he was off-site a lot. And so I went to one of the office staff. I wrote him a quick note and said, I just can't do this anymore. No notice, no nothing. And I left. And he called me later that afternoon, tried to talk me out of it. Said, hey, we really need you. And I said, look, his name was Bob too. I said, Bob, I feel terrible that I can give you notice or anything, but I just can't deal with the owners. I can't deal with these people anymore. And he's like, I can kind of sympathize with you. And so this is in 1985, in like September of 85. And this is back, Brian, you might remember this. This is back in the days where MTV actually still played music videos. And
yeah, I was trying to tell my son about that one day, and he's like, what? They played music videos. Yeah, I remember that.
So, being a musician from back in the day, I didn't think it was possible to get tired of watching music videos, but I discovered over the course of about 3.5 or 4 months of being unemployed that you can get tired. You can watch enough music videos on MTV to get tired of watching music videos on MTV. And so, there was no internet. There was no, monster.com or Indeed or anything. It was, if you wanted to find a job, you looked in the Sunday newspaper. That's how it was back in those days. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I would get the Sunday newspaper and I would apply for different things. And the application process was a lot harder in those days too. And not that I wasn't looking for something, I just, tough time in the economy. It was really hard to find something. And out of desperation, I saw an ad in the Sunday newspaper for a new Oldsmobile. It's back car brand that doesn't exist anymore, but a lot of people will remember Oldsmobile. New Oldsmobile salesperson. I'm 24 years old, just turned 24. And I'm like, man, never saw myself as a salesperson, and definitely not a car salesperson. I want to throw up thinking about it. I'm like, but man, I need a job, and I wonder if there's any money to be made doing that. And so went and had a series of 3 different interviews, and they told me, they said, Bob, you're pretty young. You're barely 24, but you're pretty well spoken, and you seem ambitious. And the average Oldsmobile buyer, I think, Brian, was like 52. And they said,
that wasn't a young hip automobile, even back in the day. If you had an Oldsmobile, it was kind of like, well, you either had kids because they had a station wagon version, because my parents had an Oldsmobile station wagon. You had the station wagon version for families, and then you had the version because you were just newly retired and you didn't want to spend money on a Cadillac.
Right. Yeah, it was sort of a step down from a Cadillac, right? Yeah. In fact, our dealership was Oldsmobile and Cadillac. Like, we didn't sell Cadillacs because that was a different side of the store. But yeah, so anyway, they hired me. They gave me a chance, and not really even sort of knowing what I was doing, but just working hard, treating people the way I thought I would want to be treated if I were shopping for a car. Brian, I started making 4 or 5 times as much money as I was used to making before. And I'm like, holy smokes. I said, I don't really like the car business because I don't know what it's like now, but this is the mid 80s. It didn't really feel very straightforward to me. And that didn't really kind of fit with my core. But I said, but I could get used to making this kind of money, so if I didn't have to compromise my morals. And so I had a guy who ended up being a friend recruited me into the real estate business, and that's a kind of a fun way to make a living, really good living sometimes and a terrible living sometimes. I did that for 4 years.
Bob, what did you? I got to jump in here. What did you learn from selling cars 35 years ago that you still put into practice today?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned really was that if you have a good work ethic, just that alone, that and some persistence, you'll beat most people. I mean, I became one of the top salespeople there, not really even knowing what I was doing, but there were, back in those days, 4 days a week we closed at 9 p.m. And I'm married, but I had no children at that point, and I needed to make money. So after 8:30, when all the other salespeople sort of disappeared into the woodwork, somebody came on the lot, I was talking to them, right? My manager started referring to me as king of the late night. And I got in a habit, if somebody came in at 8:45, I'd go out and greet them, be cordial, nice with them, and introduce myself. And
you were Johnny Carson before. You and Johnny Carson shared that same title because he was king of the late night, and so he should have just called you Carson,
maybe. But anyway, so I got in the habit of telling him. I said, listen, you guys may or may not be aware of this, but it's 8:45. We actually close in 15 minutes. But if you're serious about finding a car today, I'll work with you to, as long as it takes to find you the car that you want. Are you serious about finding one? If they told me, yeah, I was in, right? If they said, we're just kind of kicking tires or whatever. But generally, if they came on a lot that late, they were serious about it, right? They needed to find a car. Same thing if somebody came in on a rainy day or a snowy day, right? So you just got to know. And the other thing I think that it really taught me was to not prejudge people. Too many, I think, people that are in sales do that because you have somebody come in and raggedy blue jeans before they were in style, raggedy blue jeans and a t-shirt, right, or a wife beater. Some people know what those are. And,
Yeah, we're
people would,
familiar over here in the Mountain State with that. That's formal wear in West Virginia, Bob.
yeah. So people would ignore them because they're like, "Oh, I'm not wasting my time with those people." And I had a guy who was dressed like that, and he was a farmer. And this was the first new car he bought in like 10 years. And he paid cash, pulled out a wad of cash and paid cash for it. Right? Nobody else wanted to talk to him. So
and this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, so this is probably in the downtown Cincinnati area where you were selling cars in that particular region, southwestern Ohio?
Southwestern Ohio, but not in Cincinnati. It was in a little town called Fairfield, Ohio.
Yeah, I know right where Fairfield is. My point to that for the audience to give some clarity around that is heavy farm country. You see a lot of farms in that Southwest Ohio area, especially rural Southwest Ohio. And so it probably wasn't uncommon for some of those guys to roll in there that were farmers dressed like that. Because you'd see them in the grocery store and they'd be dressed like that. You'd see them out at Walmart or something like that. That was the way they dressed. And so, maybe, did you start to get some of those clientele like, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't add up here. You're on an Oldsmobile dealer lot, and you're rolling up dressed like this?
Well, yeah, and one of the things that I found, and by the way, the salespeople always had coat and tie back in those days.
Yeah, that was yeah.
The salespeople are dressed way more casually in today's world. You go onto a car lot and people have polos on,
yeah,
right, with a dealer name, over here on the left breast. But back in those days, you had to have a coat and tie. Didn't necessarily have to be a suit, couldn't be a sport coat or something like that, but that was the dress code, right?
Hey, I was selling food to restaurants, and my boss insisted on coat and tie, or at least a shirt and tie.
Yeah.
And of course, my wife said, can you expense your dry cleaning? Because when you come from some of these restaurants, you smell like a meat fryer.
I bet.
But to your point, Bob, back in those days, salespeople had an image. It didn't matter what you were selling. The image of the salesperson was professional dress, sport coat or suit, nice slacks, tie, shoes, shined. I mean, that's where the wingtip got its popularity, because most every salesperson was wearing wingtip shoes, because that was an image builder for sale. I had to park there because it sparked something in my mind, because I got in trouble one day. You'll appreciate this. I got in trouble one day because it was a summer day. It was about 98 degrees at 8:30 in the morning, and I thought, I'm going to put a polo on. And my sales manager surprised me by showing up at a restaurant about 9 o'clock. He figured I was going to be there, but he didn't tell me he was coming. And we get in the car and he goes, we need to run to your house real quick. And I said, what are we going to run to the house for? He said, because you're going to change into your shirt and tie. He said, because you don't have a shirt and tie on. I said, man, it's 18,000 degrees outside today. And I didn't know you were coming. And I had to hoof it back 10 minutes to my house. I said, if I'm going to put a shirt and tie on, you're sitting in the car. I'm not inviting you in the house, because I'm inconvenienced. But Bob, to your point, again, this is how business has changed today. And I didn't mean to jump off there, but I think you've hit on something there, that now the evolution of sales has come to the point where if the salesperson is dressed more comfortably, the thought is the customer will be more comfortable. And it's now starting to form into that, let's get comfortable. Let's get, instead of the clear delineation between salesperson and customer. And that's a beautiful point that you hit on there. I wanted to park there for just a minute.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So, yeah, but as I think back on it, you kind of reminded me, some of the things that I did learn. In the it was less than a year that I sold cars, but there, and I think it's a good lesson for anybody who's sort of, you know, looking to level up, is that even from a poor experience, or a bad experience, what you can learn something from that. What are the takeaways? And I think you can learn, and frankly, you probably do learn more from your failures than you learn from your successes. And I think when you begin to look at failure as a teacher rather than as something to lament, then your perspective of it changes, and you're less averse to failing. And once you can adopt that mindset, that's really where your successes start to come more rapidly. When you become detached from outcome, I would call it, where you're just getting results. Some of them are going to be positive, some of them are not going to be positive. But what can you learn from those that aren't positive? And when you start doing that, and you start reflecting on the actions that you took that led to a not success, then you just start looking at it differently. And that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's such an important lesson to learn. And it took me so long to learn that. I was on being interviewed on another show a few days ago, and one of the things that I told the host was, man, I had to get my nose bloodied a lot before I stopped getting punched.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so it's so important to learn those lessons, because they can help you really improve over time. I don't know if this is true, but I heard a story one time that the Apollo 11 moonshot, the first successful time they landed a man on the moon and brought him back safely to the Earth, was off course like 95% of the time. And they had to continually do little tiny course corrections to make sure that they were on course. So you can be off course. You can get off course. In fact, you can get pretty far off course. And as long as you're willing to keep your eyes on the prize, knowing where you're going, and having clarity on that, and having a time frame, I think that's important. Let me back up a step. I don't think that's important. I know that that's important, to have a time frame.
Yeah.
Time's only good if it has an end, right?
Well, and Bob, you're 100% right. And a lot of businesses don't make those tiny course corrections because they are afraid that a tiny course correction will open up other problems that they either can't or won't solve in their business. And so even the minute course corrections become magnified. And of course, in the example that you gave, and I appreciate you using that example, it was a life or death thing. If they didn't make those tiny course corrections, they weren't going to bring those men back safely. And manned space flight as we know it probably wouldn't exist, because there would be so much fear about getting people home safely back to their families. I got to ask you this for a second, because something you said earlier about the first job that you had with a family company. I've been there.
Mm.
Was there one thing that you took from that experience so long ago that when you started your own company, you said, I'm not going to do this with my company like I saw the first time I worked for a family-owned company?
Absolutely. There's a right way to treat people, and there's a wrong way to treat people. And I can tell you that with that company, I got treated not like a human being, not like somebody who mattered. And so I've endeavored in all of my relationships to treat people um, with the respect that they deserve, and with care. And it's and I think when you do that, um, life's like a big mirror. It's going to reflect back to you. What you put out is going to come back. And so, if that's the way you treat people, if you treat people with respect, if you genuinely care about them, if you're genuinely interested in them, then you will not, even when they're screwing up, which I probably was, right? Um, you, you know, when you treat them with care and understanding, um, and even if you have to have a conversation about something that they're doing wrong,
Hmm.
don't make it personal. It's about the behavior. It's not about the person.
Well, who doesn't screw up in a job at 22 or 23 years old? There was, I got my first sales job a month before I turned 23, and there were days I was flying by the seat of my pants. I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was just to keep my head down and work. And if I messed up, that's what I had a boss for, was to correct me. And that's the thing is you wish, if I could go back to put my arm around 23-year-old Brian as 48-year-old Brian, I'd probably say, dude, here's some things you need to think about. Here's some, and by the way, it turns out okay. You end up with a pretty wife and you end up looking halfway decent. You have a good looking kid. So, it's going to be okay, man. You're going to be all right. Everything's going to work out for you. Bob, I got to ask you this as we finish. This has been such a fun conversation. This is exactly the conversation I was hoping we would have when we started. And I hope you've enjoyed it as well. But I've got to ask you, what's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement to leave with the audience as we finish our conversation today?
I would tell people that it's never as bleak as you think. Even on your worst possible day, and we all have those days from time to time, right? It's not as bad as you think. And I don't know if this is biblical, Brian. You might have more insight on this, but I think it is. There's a saying that I think it's a proverb: "This too shall pass."
Yep.
So no matter where you are, if things aren't working out the way you wanted them to or thought they would, um, keep persisting forward. Everybody stumbles in life, and I had an early mentor of mine that said, everybody's going to stumble, but when you stumble forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the only way things are not going to improve is if you just stop dead. And so don't do that. Um, you can work yourself out of a funk. I've done that so many times, and it's just that's where willpower comes in, and that's, I think, where you have to have clarity about where you're going. So many people are just, man, they expect to fail and hope to get lucky and win. But your expectations become your reality. So begin, I think that's a good place to begin, is to be setting your expectations, and by the way, not what you tell the world you expect, but what you really expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to amplify those, um, because you're probably better than you think you are. And since some of those trainings I was talking about that we've done, I've had some people tell me this overtly, and some people you can just tell by a change in their physiology that over the course of one of these training fun shops, they'll come up with 2 or 3 or 4 good ideas, either on their own or working on a team, And some people have told me, man, you know what? I'm a little sharper than I thought I was. I'm a little better than I've been giving myself credit for. And they carry themselves different. And that's one of the most satisfying aspects for me. So I would tell people listening to this or watching this, you're probably better than you think you are. You maybe are better than you've been giving yourself credit for. So keep hope, right? And keep going.
Man, that's freaking brilliant right there. That is so good. Bob Sager, man, this conversation has been so much fun because again, it's real, it's happening, and I am so grateful for your time. You can find Bob on LinkedIn. Just search Bob Sager. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him on Facebook. Search SpearPoint, SpearPoint, SpearPoint Solutions, and on Twitter, Sager Bob, SagerBob. Bob, thank you, man, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, man. This has been such fun conversation today. I appreciate you joining us on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
My pleasure to be here, Brian.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through His Word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional